to be here today. This class didn't exist when I went to Haas more than more than a while ago. So it's really exciting to be able to see this type of class at Haas and to be speaking with all of you. So my name is Kelly Liu, and I lead our Code of Conduct Conformance program and our Human Rights and Worker Wellbeing program within the supply chain at Cisco Systems. So I'll provide a bit of an overview of how we address human rights issues within our supply chains, but I'll sort of start with an overview of exactly what we do as a company, because some of you may or may not be a bit familiar. So we are we're considered in the tech world a little bit more old school. And so essentially Cisco helped invent the internet back in the 80s. And ever since then, we provide both hardware and software services related to helping the world operate on the internet. So these numbers are a bit old because we just finished the fiscal year of 21 and the financials haven't come out yet, but essentially in the previous year, we had about $49 billion in revenue. We operate across 95 countries and have more than 77,000 employees. So you can see a bit of a mix of the type of products and solutions that we provide around the globe. I wouldn't be surprised if you're accessing Wi-Fi at the UC Berkeley campus based on equipment that we might have provided to the university. So just to give you a bit of an idea of our scope here, we are processing over 1,900 orders every day. And this is across our global supply chain. So you can get a sense of where it's dispersed across Latin America, the Americas, the Asian Pacific region, and the European region. So we have within our supply chain a mix of manufacturing partners, component suppliers, and logistics partners. We outsource all of our manufacturing, and what that means is we don't own any of our manufacturing facilities. So our partners produce our finished products, and then those component suppliers provide parts to those manufacturing partners. And then the logistics service providers transport all of those components and finished products either to our manufacturing facilities or to our customers. So just to give you a sense of what my team covers, we're called the Supply Chain Sustainability Team, and internally we're also known as the Social and Environmental Responsibility Team. We play the role of identifying, mitigating, and preventing human rights risks to people and the environment around the world. Our team strongly believes that environmental issues are a social justice issue, which by the way means that it's also a human rights issue, because if we work to protect people within our global communities and global supply chains, it would be irresponsible to not be protecting the place where they need to live as well. So we have a variety of programs and program managers who lead these programs. One, which I'm sure you've either learned in your class or are familiar with, are code of conduct programs. And that's heavily geared towards ensuring that a particular baseline is being followed by the suppliers in our supply chain. So Cisco was a founding member of the Responsible Business Alliance, and we contributed to the development of the RBA Code of Conduct. So by developing this code, we're able to proliferate standards and expectations across labor, health and safety, the environment, and ethics, and essentially responsible business activities throughout our supply chain, but push the same standards that many of our other peers and our suppliers are also proliferating to their suppliers. So that's our foundational program to really ensure that the system operates aligned to a particular baseline. And then on top of that, we have targeted initiatives that really try to get at more directly impacting workers' lives. So either protecting them or providing them with opportunities where they can thrive. So one of the programs that I lead has to do with preventing and stopping forced labor in the supply chain. That's our freely chosen employment program. Modern slavery is still an issue, and that's an area where I focus quite a bit of time on. So we have also our ethical sourcing of minerals program. You might have learned that electronics products rely on particular minerals in order to operate. And these minerals can be sourced from conflict affected or high risk areas. So we have a responsible minerals policy for sourcing those responsibly and for seeing how we can drive value to the very beginning of the supply chain where some of these human rights issues might be taking place. So I'm not going to go through all of the programs that are on this slide, but you can kind of get a sense across environmental and human rights areas, the types of issues that we're covering. And since our code of conduct program is foundational, I wanted to give you a sense of how it works. Essentially, we call it the supplier engagement process on the right-hand side. So if we have tens of thousands of component suppliers and several manufacturers, it's not possible to audit every single factory in our supply chain. So we rely on what's our risk assessment process. And so we evaluate our supply base based on social and environmental risk factors. We have data regarding whether suppliers might have foreign migrant workers. And so that's a risk indicator for forced labor, for example. Or we might know if there are young workers that are employed at a particular facility. So there could be different flags that we might want to look into with particular suppliers based on inherent risk factors that they have, either within their own activities or the geographies where they reside in. And then we move on to a variety of assessment questionnaires. So this can include on-site audits, or this can include remote questionnaires that our team manages with suppliers. And if we identify issues, we have a corrective action plan process. So according to all of the issues and the severity of them, we monitor them until closure according to a particular timeline. So if there are, for example, very acute risks to health and safety or emergency preparedness. So the facility has locked doors and people might not be able to escape during a fire. That is actually fixed immediately on site at the closure of the audit. And then they have 90 days, or actually 30 days to fix that issue, but 90 days to ensure that it's a process is in place to prevent it from ever happening again, essentially. So all of the types of issues that we find that are non-conformances to our code of conduct have a particular timeline within which they have to resolve those issues by. And since, again, resources are limited to follow up on suppliers regularly across our entire supply chain, we really rely on capability building. We want to prevent these issues from coming back again. We don't want to just put band-aids on issues. Otherwise, we would continue to see suppliers just meet performance in order to make us happy and in order to, quote unquote, pass an audit. So behavior change is really important in this space, and driving the right incentives and the right activities and the understanding for why suppliers should be investing in some of these issues is really what we do within the corrective action process and the capability building process. And with that, we have supplier scorecards. So scorecards aggregate all of the different performance areas across a variety of programs, including code of conduct conformance, to drive that incentive that I mentioned. So if they don't have stellar scores on their audits, if they have high risk smelters within their supply chain, they receive a particular score in order to drive them and incentivize them to perform better in sustainability. And that can be effective because essentially we're putting sustainability aligned in importance and with other qualities like cost, on-time delivery, product quality, for example. So another piece that I'd like to get at is sometimes conducting due diligence within supply chain is really looked at as a risk prevention activity. And that's not just the only way that we want to really look at this work. The idea is that we can both protect workers from harm, but we want to be able to give them opportunities where they can thrive within our supply chain. And so that workers are essentially better off being in our supply chain than in the supply chain of perhaps one of our other peers or competitors or in another industry, for example. I think if you were to talk to several, which I'm sure of peers of mine at apparel companies, the apparel industry inherently has different human rights challenges than the electronics industry does. Electronics industry tends to have more formalized practices because there's so much intellectual property investment, so much capital investment that goes into building and creating an electronics factory and training people to create high quality products. So the implications of ruining a $3 t-shirt versus something that goes into, a silicon photonics device are very different. And so that creates a different scenario for how these workers are, the conditions that they're working in, essentially. So I've mentioned a couple of items on the left-hand side of preventing harm. We heavily work on stopping and preventing forced labor within our supply chain, but also health and safety risks that workers might encounter. So a program that I work on, for example, seeks to develop tools and resources for our suppliers in order to prevent workers from being exposed to harm from hazardous chemicals. Chemical harm can be really difficult to demonstrate and measure because usually people don't get sick immediately when they're exposed to chemicals. They might develop cancer or leukemia, 6 or 8 years later, and it's difficult to attribute that to particular work that they might have performed at a factory. So the prevention is really key there, especially for an illness that might not be foreseeable or seen by either the factory or the person. So on the right-hand side, resilience and worker well-being is really important to us. If we have tens of thousands of workers in our supply chain, and even right now during the pandemic, it is incredibly important to ensure that they feel comfortable producing products while the pandemic is going on. So when the entire world went and shifted virtual, our products became very important and essential because everyone needed to move online. They all needed equipment in order to either work from home or go to school from home. But even more critical than that, hospitals, mobile clinics, COVID testing sites, they all needed internet in order to operate. And so we really focused at the beginning of the pandemic on getting products into the hands of those critical services that needed to operate at the height of the pandemic. And in order to do that, our supply chain workers had to go to work. So protecting their human rights and their health and safety was of utmost importance at that time. But it's not just about physical health, it's also about their mental health, because there's quite a bit of stress that can come from having to be an essential worker and go to work to produce these products. The last thing I'd like to highlight is that there's only so much work that one company really can do, and collective action is really important within our industry. Collective action allows us to not only ensure that baseline standards proliferate across the system, but incentivize the right behaviors across the supply chain as well, and address goals that we all agree on. So I mentioned that we participate in the Responsible Business Alliance, and there are different initiatives, the Responsible Minerals Initiative, the Responsible Labor Initiative, and different membership organizations where we help to build solutions alongside our peers. This is all pre-competitive activities because we believe that more value should be put in to our supply chains to produce better environments or better working conditions for the workers within our supply chains. For the most part, we are at one end of the supply chain, and there's value that is being created all the way down to the raw materials extraction period. So in order to reach the beginning of the supply chain, collective action is absolutely required. And especially in the space of raw materials and minerals. So we heavily rely on our European Partnership for Responsible Minerals. We're also, some of our work can be indirect in terms of trying to influence the particular system that our suppliers operate, but they can also be more direct in trying to find ways to improve the lives of workers or improve the lives of miners who are at the beginning of the supply chain, for example. So that really concludes an overview of the programs. I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any slides that you might be interested in.